Okay, we're now live.
Hello everyone and welcome to the next in the National Policing Cybersecurity webinar series. As with all the previous ones, we'll wait for the Zoom platform to bring everyone across from the waiting room. And once we think we've kind of reached the numbers, we'll then get started. So for those that have already signed in or are with us, you're going to hear me say that a couple of times. And for those that have just joined us, we're just going to wait for the Zoom platform to bring everyone across before we actually start the session. We have quite a few people signed up for today, so it might take a little bit of time. It normally takes around about 45 to 60 seconds, something like that. So it won't be too much longer. And when we see numbers start to stabilize, that's when we'll get started, which from looking at the numbers may be fairly soon. So yeah, I think we're probably round about there. So we'll get started now. So again, welcome to everyone for joining us for the next in the National Policing Cybersecurity webinar series. Today's event is being brought to you by our colleagues from the East Midlands Special Operations Unit. But you guys yourself actually have some options during this webinar as well. So for those that haven't used Zoom before, or for those that haven't been with us on any of the previous ones, I'm just going to run through your options in this session as well. So if you look down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A and chat button. If you click the Q&A button, this is where you can type your questions in for any sort of question you have throughout this session. You'll also see within the questions will be, when someone writes a question down, there will be a little thumb sign. You can click that thumb sign to vote that question, and the more votes a question gets, the further on up the list it will be pushed, and the more chance you'll then have of having that question answered. You can also answer a question if you want to do that. So if you also open up the chat, we have some messages coming through actually that we've got a bit of feedback from here. So I wonder if I could just ask our panelists just to check their microphones for us while I talk about the chat function. So hopefully that doesn't continue. So if you click on the chat box, thanks for everyone for letting us know that, by the way. If you click on the chat box, you'll see it open up on the right-hand side of your screen. There you have a little introduction into the session, as well as some information for you to have a look at if you want to. So you can actually type a message here down the bottom, and you can send it to either all the panelists or all the panelists and all the other attendees. What I would say, however, though, please remember this is a policing event, and as you'll see by the top of the screen, it is being recorded. So don't put anything on there that you don't want recorded on the internet forever, effectively. So we'll be monitoring, both Dave and I, who are from the Cyber Griffin team at City of London Police, we'll both be monitoring both the question section and the chat section. So any questions or comments, please feel free to write them in there. And I'm going to pass you over to Richard from the East Midlands Special Operations Unit for your session. So have a great time.
Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully you can see me and there's no lag here. But my name is Richard Haseman. I'm from the East Midlands Special Operations Unit. And this is kind of our presentation on incident response. You can download the presentation from the website that you can see there, cyberforschools.net. I know it says for schools, but it has a much more general kind of application than just schools. It's for all organizations. And in fact, there are two presentations. One on incident response is kind of geared towards network managers. So there's a bit of technical info in there, plus sort of like sort of workshops and activities that you can do to practice incident response. And then there's another presentation which I've created for sort of senior leadership teams, management, sort of CEOs of organizations. But there's a lot of crossover between the two. And hopefully this presentation will be useful to everyone. But just so, you know, before I kick off, if you do suffer a cyber incident, or, you know, you get attacked, you know, it's a really good idea to call the police or if you feel woefully unprepared for incident response, to call some of the cyber engagement teams, because we really are there to help. We can help you identify, contain, and recover from an incident. We can look at your processes and refine them for kind of like future events. Our support is free. We have trained specialists to give a hand, and of course, involving sort of the police or our cybersecurity advisors show due care and diligence. It shows that you're interested in protecting your systems and you're doing what you can to protect them. We are certainly not there to investigate you or assess your compliance against whatever legislative or industry regulations may exist for your organization. And we are very, very mindful of your critical operations and your critical business functions, and we don't want to disrupt those in any kind of shape or form. So what I want to really begin with is the kill chain. And the kill chain is the steps that an attacker or an adversary will take to attack your organization. And it normally always starts with reconnaissance. Now, what I mean by reconnaissance is that the attacker is using sort of open source intelligence, such as corporate websites or news reports or your social media profile. They may even kind of visit your premises to kind of scope it out. And what they're looking for are kind of vulnerabilities or a good way of attacking your organization. Sometimes they're more aggressive than that as well, and they might scan your network or your perimeter defenses using sort of well-known security tools like Kali Linux or something like that to kind of test for vulnerabilities. And once they find those vulnerabilities, they start moving in to exploiting them. Now, a lot of this focuses around kind of like social engineering employees, which is why staff training is critically important. But it may be something like, manipulating them to click a link or to download an attachment. It may be to try and trick them into visiting an infected, poisoned website. It may be that your workers remote in and sort of mobile work, and perhaps they're using insecure connections that we can take advantage of. It may be that we drop an infected USB on the floor and hope that somebody picks it up. Or, there could be lots of other problems with your network setup. Maybe you're using old, out-of-date software or older services that, kind of have a lot of vulnerabilities, and we will exploit them to get into the system. Of course, once we're in, the next step of the kill chain is kind of expansion and entrenchment. And the aim there is to really infect as many systems as you can, and ideally get kind of privileged credentials. And, because those, administrative rights or the CEO kind of like access rights, that's all the juicy stuff. We often hear the term kind of living off the land when we talk about this stage. And really, there are plenty of tools that would allow me, plenty of security tools that would allow me to hop and pivot onto different systems within your organization and crack passwords and all the rest of it. But they're very noisy. And if you've got an IT team that are kind of worth their salt, then they might pick up on some of that activity. So it's much better if I can use the inbuilt tools that are already existing on your system, something like PowerShell or WMIC, which your administrators will be using. If I can find passwords, passwords are the keys to the kingdom, because if I can get someone's password, then that's not going to set off any alarm bells when I start accessing materials. And there are so many different ways in which passwords can become available to me. What we're talking about here, though, in this stage, is that the dwell time, the period that I'm in your network, it can be months rather than a few days. and people are, or organizations are very unaware of this. I mean, I think they say now that the average dwell time is 6 months, which is pretty unbelievable, you know, to have someone in your systems for that length of time, kind of casing the joint. Once you've kind of scoped the network and you've expanded and you've done what you wanted to do, they move on to step 4, and that's kind of like exfiltration of data or damage. So maybe they steal your data covertly, sort of bit by bit, piecemeal, so you don't you're not alerted to that, or it might be en masse. And that's a lot of companies that we talk to sometimes don't know whether their data has been compromised, because it's kind of still there. It's not like it's suddenly missing, and it's kind of copy and paste rather cut and paste. And of course, they might then deliver a payload like ransomware where they encrypt your systems and demand payment, and then that's when people start noticing. The final part, the kill chain, is really kind of removing the fingerprints from the smoking gun. So it might be purging log entries. Now, logs track activity on your network. So if I can get rid of that, you can't trace what I've been doing. I might delete some of the files that I've been using on my file history. I might remove some of the software that I've installed to get me access to different systems. Or I might even plant false flags, which will maybe incriminate somebody else within your somebody else in your employment, or put a false trail of breadcrumbs in case I need to get back into your system somehow. Never, never, ever underestimate the modern adversary. We are ninjas in shadows rather than sort of like pirates with big cutlasses screaming on. And, you know, cybercrime has seen massive commercialization. There are entire buildings with an entire workforce dedicated to this kind of criminal activity, because it's big business and it means a lot of money. I've got here a timeline of a typical kind of kill chain. There's something that we see. And you can see there it says in June, like, you know, ransomware. And that's when your employee turns on their computer and thinks, oh no, you know, everything's encrypted, we need to make some sort of payment. When in fact, what actually happened was back in February, the attacker discovered some sort of weakness in your system and exploited that. I put their RDP, and we get a lot of headaches from RDP. It's just one way in which a worker can remote in to your network and do some work. It could be that, you know, in February they managed to steal some passwords. Towards March, they then start to pivot onto other systems. In March, maybe they use one of your computers to host web content that's illegal, and which traces back to you. It could be March, April, that they then start looking at your email systems and harvesting your addresses to send spam to your customers or launch phishing attacks. It may be that in April, they download your customer data. I mean, we sometimes talk to companies and say, well, did you know that your data is being sold on the dark web? And it often comes as a shock to them that, no, they weren't aware at all. We might start co-opting your PCs to attack other organizations. We might steal customer credentials and max out on credit cards, or make fraudulent use of that data. You know, and we might steal your software keys so that we can sell your software. I mean, there are so many different things we can do on a network that it's never really a case of, well, I have no idea why anybody would want to attack my network. Do we have any questions? I don't know whether Rich or Dave, do we have any questions about the kill chain or something like that that you'd like me to answer?
We don't have any questions specifically about the kill chain at the moment. We do have one question on there, but I think that would probably be better answered later on in your session. So, Kyle, we will get to your question, but it will be a bit later in the session.
Okay.
For anyone that does want to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box down the bottom of your screen there to either type your question in or vote on one that's already been asked.
Lovely. I'll push on then. Okay. So let's get into stage 1 of incident response, and this is preparation. Now, it's a really good idea to kind of policy or to define kind of the scope of the incident response team, i.e. what their job is, and also some of the kind of the privileges or the access rights that they have. So you might want to document that the incident response team has the authority to remove network access if that becomes sort of justifiable, or that they have permissions to seize and forensically examine any device on your internal network, or any device on your, or any business system. And interestingly, it shouldn't matter who owns that device, whether it's you or the employee. If it's on your network and it's using your business systems, then that device must be accountable. You need to have some visibility into it and as to whether it's secure. But in adherence to event logging or intrusion detection or incident handling and monitoring standards, that incident response team needs to monitor the corporate network, and they need to be able to see the traffic coming in, which is kind of like ingress traffic, and traffic going out, which we call egress traffic. They need that kind of visibility. It's also very important for you to develop a communication plan prior to an incident taking place, because an incident responder is going to need to know who to contact if there is a problem. You're also going to need to know when it is appropriate to contact that person and how contact should be made. And of course, this varies depending upon the type of incident or security threat that the company experiences. And you will have slightly different communication plans for different type of incidents. So, for example, a communication plan where your company is attacked on a Monday at 9:30 is going to look very different to a communication plan at the close of business, such as like 5 o'clock on a Friday. And that incident response team needs to call, the various individuals with responsibilities for getting your system back up and running. They're going to need to be able to contact which managers need updating and how the incident is progressing towards a resolution, and impacted departments. And it is a nightmare when you are trying to resolve a problem and, you need to message out to your network users to stop using certain services while you try and repair and fix them. So any delays to your incident response actions will really undermine your recovery. So it's a good idea to not only think about what the incident team does, but also to define a communication plan for the kind of different problems. And I know that West Mids are going to do a presentation next week, I believe, and they're going to talk a little bit more about that, which is why I've kept it quite brief. You should also define roles. So what I'm thinking about here is, well, who will lead the incident response team? Maybe you already have some sort of person in mind, like the network manager or something like that. They also need to know how they're going to make purchases, because sometimes, an incident might be that computer equipment has been damaged, or, it's gone offline, and you need to buy hardware or software, or, switching and cabling. So how are you going to make that happen kind of quickly and efficiently so that there are no kind of holdups? You've got to think of that beforehand. Who will the incident team liaise with in HR? Because some breaches involve your internal staff, and HR particularly relevant when there's been sort of like a breach of your own kind of network policy. You might want to think carefully about who will deal with any applicable legislation or regulatory issues. For instance, many companies have contractual obligations that they need to think about. Or, if you're collecting customer data, which is sensitive, any breach there means thinking about talking to like the ICO. So you need people who can consider those legal and regulatory ramifications and know when to call them in. who within your organization will have the skill and the diplomacy to communicate information, not only vertically throughout your organization, but also horizontally as well, to sort of impacted departments, because, you know, it's normally very unpopular news when you have a problem, and it needs to be handled very sensitively. You know, you've got to explain the incident, you've got to give updates, address concerns, you know, and that's not just to internal parties and impact departments, but to maybe the press, you know, or to external agencies. And that takes a little bit of forethought about who's going to communicate and the best way of communicating, or how you're going to make yourself reachable for your customers. You're going to have to think about who's going to answer the support desk phone, because you cannot fix an incident. And you know, when that's ringing, I can guarantee it will be constantly kind of ringing as well. And then you've got to kind of think carefully about who's going to work with third parties, such as the police or regulators or something like that. So it's very important to define the roles, as well as come up with a communication plan, and to kind of like get a good idea of what you want that incident response team to do. Perhaps the most important step, though, is to define your crown jewels. And what I'm really talking about here is that as a business leader, you really need to think about which systems you have that will have the highest impact on your operations if they are compromised. What can you know, what is critical to you, and what can you not afford to lose, right? And that needs communicating to your incident response team, because that's going to impact on the kind of actions that they take. For example, which systems they need to get up and running, you know, as a priority. You've also got to think very carefully about what data will be the most deleterious to lose. What data can you not afford to get out there? For example, what's most important to you? Is it your reputation that you need to protect? Is it some form of intellectual property which keeps your company, gives it that competitive edge? Is it customer or employee data, like their personal information or their health information or credit card information? Is it the employees with access to sensitive data that you want to protect most of all, like administrators and executive employees? Is it your building and infrastructure that is most priceless to you? You see, the thing is, once you know what is the most important thing to protect in your organization, you can then prioritize your time and your resources protecting those things. And crucially, for incident response, you can focus the efforts of the incident response team and give them the priorities. I also think it's very important to classify an incident when one occurs. And I'm suggesting here sort of three ways of classifying problems: functional impact, information impact, and recoverability efforts. So for example, if you take functional impact, you may have an incident with no effect. So in other words, it doesn't affect your organization's ability to provide any of the services to any of its users. It's really quite low key. Alternatively, that might go on the other side of the continuum and be a kind of high functional impact, in which case you might have lost all your critical service for all users. Again, you might consider informational impact. So you might be talking here about no impact whatsoever. No data was exfiltrated or stolen, and no data was compromised, amended, changed, deleted, or anything like that. Alternatively, you might find that you have a privacy breach in which the sensitive information of employees or customers has been compromised or lost. Or you might have a proprietary breach where protected critical infrastructural information has been lost, or internal documentation that you didn't really want getting out. In terms of recoverability effort, you might have, again, just like a regular kind of, in other words, the recovery time is predictable and it can be done with existing resources and no additional requirements. Or it might be extended, which is my second to last one there. Recovery is unpredictable. You're going to need additional resources and you're probably going to need outside help. You see, the point is, if you classify an incident in that way, straight away it conveys meaning. Everybody is kind of working from the same hymn sheet. It all means the same thing to everybody else. And everyone has a kind of an idea of what kind of action is going to be necessary and what kind of impact that's going to have on your organization. So classifying an incident at the outset and also as it progresses is very important to make sure that everybody understands the strategy and the likely consequences. Finally, I think it's important to think about technical training as well for your IT staff, because your IT staff are going to need to understand auditing software which tracks what happens on your network. They need to understand logs to do that, security logs. They need to interrogate those logs to find out what has happened. And sometimes that means using the command line, which is quite a specialist skill. So they need time to do that. They also need time to document the network. Now, if your house is not in order, really, incident response is not the way forward. You've got to make sure your house is in order first. In other words, your network team should have a very good idea of what your network should look like, so that if there's a problem, and what it shouldn't look like, they're alerted to that quite quickly. And that means looking at all your baselines and typical behavior on your network. It also means that they might have to introduce new systems to capture problems and to give you visibility into them. They need to perform auditing and time to interpret those findings. They need to practice incident response. And again, I think West Mids next week are going to talk about that. And I've got a document that I want to refer to in a bit. In other words, they have a tabletop exercise where they go through different scenarios and what they will do, so that when an incident happens, they can react calmly and with confidence, or they can evaluate the validity of their auditing and their action plans. Are there any questions, Rich or Dave, on that stage of incident response?
So we've not got any questions on that particular stage, but we do have one from your first stage, which maybe help with. Yeah, so they have a question on how do they raise awareness to small businesses about the importance of understanding that kill chain?
How do you raise awareness of it?
Yeah, to small businesses about the importance
small
of
businesses. It. I mean, I guess there's multiple ways in reaching out to small business. Most ROCUs or will have a cyber engagement team that are hopefully doing that. But sometimes, sort of social media messaging can be one effective way of getting out critical information and reaching out to companies, to advertise these kinds of services. That's really challenging. Yeah, I mean, messaging, I suppose, is important, and making the engagement team know as well, because there must be a cyber engagement for all areas across the country that do this kind of work.
Yeah, great. So, yeah, absolutely. So for anyone listening, definitely get in contact with your local service.
Yeah. I mean, we've spent a long time reaching out to business with messaging, and sort of doing weekly sort of like updates about hot topics and security, like phishing attacks, and looking at different types of attacks and getting messaging out that way, and that's proved really successful. So something along those lines might work too.
Okay, great. And we do have two further separate questions, but that's more about what happens once you report it. So maybe that's probably better to take closer to the end, do you think?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, yeah. Because that would be pursued sort of team things.
Okay, yeah. So we'll come to those. We'll come to those ones at the end then.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So let's move on to stage 2, which is the detection stage of incidents. Now, one of the things that I think are very good, and one of the things that I really like it, are honeypots. Honeypots, honey accounts, honey files, honey nets, honey hashes. These are really useful ways of detecting an attack quite early on. And I think they're brilliant. So for example, how it might work is that you set up a bogus file or a bogus account or a bogus service like, RDP or, Telnet or something old and outdated, or a bogus server that will trigger an alert. So for instance, on my computer, I've got this password file. It's called password.txt, and it's got a list of fake passwords in. But as soon as somebody opens that file, it emails me straight away and alerts me to the fact that someone's rooting around where they shouldn't be. So they are very, very kind of useful things. They cost nothing to set up. And if you look at the rest of my slide there about artillery and Cowrie and Web Labyrinth, these are free sort of guidance about how to set up a variety of different honeypots on your network. And if you go and download this PowerPoint from cyberforschools.net, they all come with speakers notes, which are very detailed, and they will give you further advice. The idea, though, of a honeypot is that you're not encouraging people to attack your network, because that's enticement. We don't really want to go there. What we're doing is we're capturing, right, what they're doing within your network at the time. And that's quite a different sort of mentality. But that's a great way. The other thing that I quickly want to allude to is a tool called Security Onion. And this is quite good for small businesses that can't afford, sort of CM solutions. But Security Onion is a very, very comprehensive free package with 3 key tools. Okay, and I'll talk about those tools in a second. It's very widely supported. There's a huge community out there supporting it. It's continually updated. If you wanted to, you can hire support services to set it up. And again, all the available links are in the speaker's notes, should you want to. Or if you have a particularly savvy IT team, then they can go away and do that for you. Now, one of the tools that comes with it is Snort, Squeal, and Squirt. Now, what Snort will do is it will scan all the traffic on your network, all the communications on your network, and it will detect malicious actions, and it will detect malicious malware and alert you to them. In that way, it's called an intrusion detection system, right? Or it can actually prevent these attacks, and we call that an intrusion prevention system. You can configure Snort as well to look for certain activities if you're worried about a particular kind of attack vector as well. And Squeal and Squirt will let you examine those alerts to see what is happening on your network. So Squirt and Squeal, they're just very user-friendly interfaces, and they will tell you the who, the what, the when, and the how on your network. And as I say, my networking presentation on incident response has some labs to help people get used to those kinds of tools. Also, with Security Onions comes Zeek and Elasticstack. Now, Zeek will basically separate all the traffic. They're little sensors that will separate all the traffic on your network into different types of log files. And remember, log files tell you what is happening on your network. And these can help you track kind of like, when people hop to other machines, that kind of infection sort of stage of your network. And more importantly, what they will do as well is they will aggregate all this data from different sources. And one of the problems is when you take logs from one place and then you take logs from another, they look completely different. And it's very, very hard to compare them and analyze them, to track a problem. Whereas Elasticstack will take and aggregate that data, and then they will normalize that data to make comparisons easier and to make investigations easier. It is a very, very powerful tool. It will even take all those log files and it will store them as JSON files, which are very small and don't take up much storage space on your network, and quite searchable too. So it's a possible tool. Finally, security onion comes with KABINA, and this is great for threat hunting. It is a lovely dashboard with big hyperlinks and big graphics that will help you identify what normal traffic looks like, so you can spot the abnormal traffic. And so you can zone in on alerts, and so you can open different logs and files to investigate problems. And again, the PowerPoint for network managers that we've created gives you a few more ideas about how to use that. Also, for those network managers, it may be that if you don't want to call in a service, but you do need some sort of forensic evidence, there are free tools like Paladin, PEM, and FTKI, and I won't go into this slide, and just note the bold headings. And again, on that network presentation, we kind of have little labs showing you how they work, so that you can use forensically sound tools to capture some information, because some information is better than none. And they also give you a bit of advice as well, because sometimes logging on to an infected system can be a problem, especially if you've got administrative credentials. You don't want to give those away, so you've got to be careful about how you do that. But there is some sort of so you get a general idea of it on those other slides. Okay, are there any questions, guys, about that second stage of detection?
Yes, so we have a couple. So apart from Security Onion, what sort of relevant tools would you recommend to maybe a smaller business who are using, say, Office 365, but only on a few laptops?
I mean, these. I guess those kinds of tools are much better for, I suppose, slightly larger organisations where you've got multiple users. So, I mean, this is for small to medium-sized enterprises, and those tools are quite useful. But I mean, if you've only running, Windows and a couple of laptops, and you've got to just make sure that you have some sort of antivirus software on there, some sort of firewall on there, and that you're keeping, it's the basic protect device, and that you're updating that kind of sort of software and hardware as regularly as you can. I mean, I guess it's when you connect to any systems, and if you're connecting to cloud services as well, you want to make sure perhaps that you're using a VPN. The VPN will encrypt your traffic to stop people kind of looking at it and then stealing data. So if you're talking about a very small sort of network, those tools perhaps aren't appropriate for that kind of end user, and you might be better off with just kind of host-based controls like antivirus, sort of a VPN for when you do internet type things. That kind of solution. Is there any other questions?
That's a fantastic answer. Yes, one more, which may be more relevant for next week, or for Monday, sorry, because I know, as you mentioned, they're going through the actual kind of practicalities of how you set up a incident response plan.
Yes.
But do you have any good examples of cybersecurity incident response plan templates?
Yes, I do, and I'm going to show you one now.
Perfect.
Just so that you can go away and pick your team through the paces. So this is response, the response section. So you've got a problem, and you've got to contain it and then work towards some sort of resolution. And it is critical that you make some strategies prior to an incident taking place. So for instance, or the reason why I say that is because it is incredibly hard to make cool, calculated decisions in a crisis. And everyone's panicking. It really is a very, very difficult situation to handle. So you need predetermined strategies and procedures for dealing with different types of attacks. whether that attack is a denial of service and they've taken your website offline, whether it's something like one of your administrators' computers has been compromised, whether it's ransomware on your system. You need to have worked out these strategies and scenarios. On cyberforschools.net, we've got a free document, and you can see it there as the main image, which is basically a tabletop activity. And I know West Mids are doing a presentation on this next week as well, so tune in for that. But this gives you a problem, okay? And you can make that problem worse by rolling a dice and seeing what happens. And you have these injects periodically as the problem develops. And it will really make you think about all those strategies that you're going to need to talk about beforehand, so that you handle them well. So, for example, how much damage, because this is one of the things that you need to consider beforehand, how much damage to your systems are you prepared to accept, kind of like beforehand? I'm just going to move there we go. How much damage to your resources or theft of your data are you prepared to accept? Because there may be a tolerance level. How much evidence must be preserved for compliance or for legal proceedings? And that may vary depending on the type of attack that you've experienced. So work it out in advance. What is the minimum level of service you need from your network? In terms of connectivity or customer service. How much time and money are you prepared to invest in fixing the different types of problems? Again, something to work out in advance. And what workarounds are you going to use? Because again, all of this is going to affect the strategies employed by the incident response team. Once you've identified some critical services that need to get going very, very quickly, and that you only have very limited workarounds for, that's going to shape how the incident response team react to the problem. Again, our incident response team, an IT team, need to think carefully about, are we trying to contain the problem and clear it as quickly as possible or gain intel? Now, this is the thing. If I go to any manager or any business owner out there and say, what do you want to do? You want to contain it and clear it, or do you want to study it and get intel, right? They're going to turn around and say, get rid of it, get it off my network ASAP. And yet, you need to study it to some extent, because that will reveal how far an attacker has got into your system. And that will make removal and remediation much more effectively. Remember the dwell time, 6 months, right? So you've got to understand, fully get where they've been. Otherwise, they might get straight back in once you remove it. And you've got to be careful here as well, because if an adversary becomes aware that they've been discovered, as I say in my caution on the slides there, they're going to change tactics or deliver a payload. How effective would containment be for these different situations? Does the incident response team know? Can they tell you this is going to be a partial containment? No, this is going to be full. We can get this. Are they going to sanitize systems, right, or rebuild? Because that's going to give you very, very different timescales. So they need to look at these incidents and think where it is appropriate to try and clean the system, where it is appropriate to rebuild it, and what kind of criteria is affecting their decision. And then how long will the sanitization effort or the rebuilding efforts take you, all right? There's a lot of intel that you need when there is an incident. What caused the problem, what systems and data are affected, what has been lost or what will be lost, who is affected or will be affected, what's the estimated disruption time, the ongoing thoughts on the severity of a level. Tabletop exercising is great for a lot of these problems, and thinking about them in advance so you get your strategy right. What evidence has been gathered or will need to be gathered? What are the next steps to take? And one of the things that I always advise everybody within the organization to do is to document. And they're like, Rich, seriously, I've got ransomware. Are you really telling me I need to spend time committing pen to paper? And my answer to that is, yes, you do. Make the time. Because when you document, right, you're gathering your thoughts so that the next steps are the most logical and efficient ones to take. It is worth the time to step back and assess things critically. It will help you deal with future incidents as well, because you have a reference template. And also it will provide a chronological framework of evidence that may be required later on. So that's that stage kind of over and done with. I'm going to not take questions here. I'm just going to push on a little bit to get the next stage done, and then I'll take some questions as we are very mindful of your time. So the next stage is rebuilding, repair or rebuild or recovery. And one of the things that I, never, and I put this as a warning, never fails to impress me is how quickly management think systems can be restored and what the actual work time is. I went into a school not so long ago and I said, okay, write down for me all your critical activities, things that must happen, and then tell me how quickly you need these things back up and running. So they were like, it was a school, so taking registers, lesson materials and so on. And they were saying, well, we could probably wait a day for that, or a week for that. We need that in a few hours, or that doesn't have to be done to the end of the month. And then I turned around to the network team and said, and how long will it take to rebuild your system? Okay, if you get hit with ransomware and you need to reinstall. And they're like, a month. And at that point, the management were like, a month? We're living in like Doodah land here, because we're thinking like in terms of days, not months. So this is really important. What is the maximum tolerable downtime? The MTD, the maximum tolerable downtime for your mission critical activities. How long can you cope without these critical activities, or how long can you wait before the welfare of your staff becomes endangered? Okay, because once you know that, your IT team should be able to turn around and say what the recovery time is to rebuild or to sanitize your working environment. And that's where they kind of need a checklist. So they've got a rough idea of time. So they need to do a checklist. Because if you say, okay, you need to rebuild it, and they have no idea how long it's going to take, that's not terribly helpful when you need to think of workarounds. So if your work recovery time is less than your maximum tolerable downtime, you're good. But if it's not, and the work is going to take longer to repair than what you can exist for, then what are you going to do about it? Because you need to start prioritizing your time and your resources and your money when you're on this stage. Again, how much data can your organization afford to lose? If it's yesterday is like the absolute limit rather than last week, that's going to affect the kind of strategies. Because if your current system doesn't allow you to recapture or restore that data, what are you going to do about it? So that is the repair or rebuild stage. Typical activities that happen here are things like restoring systems to normal operation by restoring from a clean backup. That means that you've got to have a clean backup. So you must have a very good backup strategy. Can't emphasize that enough. Rebuilding your systems from scratch sometimes. That might involve replacing all the compromised files with clean versions of it. You might have to then install all your patches and your updates. All of this takes time. Otherwise, your system is vulnerable as soon as it comes back up online. You've got to maybe change passwords throughout your organization. It may be that you now have to tighten security controls so that you don't get a repeat of the problem. You might have to think about new ways of logging or new monitoring tools that you can introduce to make sure that we don't have a repeat or similar kinds of problems. And then we need to confirm that systems are clean. And this is an important step. And if you rush to get production systems back online when you still have a problem, it's going to do more harm than good, as things will go back down. Richard, I'm looking at the time. We've got 10 minutes. I've only got one section left to do. Are there any questions at this point that people would like to ask me about any of the stages?
So I think we have got a few other questions come in, but I think if we go to the end of your presentation, and then we can take the ones from there. So anyone that's watching, get onto the Q&A section, vote the ones that you want to be asked, and we'll ask the ones. We'll get through as many as we can at the top.
Okay, of that list. Lovely, thank you. Okay, so stage 5, and I'll keep this quite brief. This is about the lessons that can be learned from an incident. And really, you need an incident report. You need to write this report at the end of or, you know, as you're going through the process. And you ideally want to get all your stakeholders together as quickly as possible after the incident, all the key people. You need to set an agenda so that everybody gets their say and expresses what they need to. You need to develop the rules so that there's no dissension or petty arguments, because this is not about attributing blame. It's about taking feedback so that you can learn from the experience and improve and develop and optimize your processes. The incident report has got to kind of cover how the attacker gained access. I think that report should talk about the tools, the techniques, and the processes that the attacker has gone through to compromise your systems. I think it's important to try and know what their possible motives were, because, you know, if you're attacked and it always seems to be the same thing, then that might suggest, you know, different strategies that can be used, or different or an investment in certain controls. You've got to look at the impact of the organization, so that when you classify events, you kind of, you know what you're talking about almost straight away. You need to think carefully about the timeline of how quickly you were able to detect the problem and how quickly you were able to respond to that problem. Is there a difference between what IT told you originally about how long it's going to take, and what actually happens? Because, you know, if they're way out, then those timings need more thought and more adjustment. And you need to be more familiar with kind of the strategies that you go through to resolve an issue. You need to talk about what preventative controls work. Now, when I talk about preventative controls, I mean things that protected your systems, like passwords, antivirus software, the training that you gave staff to help them identify what a phishing email looks like. And then what detective controls look like. And by detective controls, I mean things like what logging you did. Did you need CCTV to log what happened? Did you need sort of like some sort of audit tracking software to say who did what on your network and when they did it? So what worked, what didn't work? Did you have visibility into the problem earlier on? Would additional logging or additional alerts have helped the problem? How do you stop a repeat of the difficulty? How could you improve your information sharing processes? Did you handle the press well? Have you learned lessons from that? What would you do differently next time when you do this sort of stuff? So it's very important to critically reflect on what has happened and take the points that work well for you and to develop and work on those, and to then think about the processes that didn't work, where there were problems, and look to improve them. Okay, that's me essentially done. And we've got a few spare minutes for any questions. Is there any, Rich, that you want me to answer? Or?
Yeah, so where would you suggest people go to maybe improve their knowledge of incident response? Are there any websites or anything like that you use?
Yeah, I mean, there's There's a very, very, very good book, and that's called Applied Incident Response. And the publisher of that is Wiley Publications. And it's by, I'm just looking at my own notes, it's by a guy called Steve Anson. And that is a very, very comprehensive process of leading you through. There's another book as well called The Incident Response Cookbook. And that's very good in helping you shape your plans. Definitely check out the West Mid presentation next week, because they seem to be focusing a lot on incident response training. Check out that document I referred to earlier, which is on the cyberforschools.net website, about that one tabletop activity that leads you through it and gets you thinking about all this in advance of the problem.
Yeah, I wonder if you could just repeat the name of that book. It broke a little bit.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. We can put it, I suppose, in the links later, but it's called Applied Incident Response. It's published by Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y, and it's by a guy called Steve Anson, and I strongly recommend it. It's a very, very comprehensive book. So that's that. And also checking out the West Mids and the cyberschools.net and that tabletop exercise.
Excellent. Yeah, we've just written that into the chat section. So if anyone wants to have a look at that
Thank
box, go in there and have a look at its name and author. So we've got a few questions which have come up along this session in regards to the police getting involved in these sort of investigations.
Sure.
So there are concerns, obviously, from businesses that if they involve a public body, that breach or attack may then become public knowledge. Is that the case?
No, that's not really the case, and I'm sure you would agree, Richard, that the police are incredibly discreet, and and it's like, and that's why I took the time as well to say we are not there to negatively impact on your organisation. We're there to help and support your organisation. We want to help you to identify where the attack came from and how it got into your system and how it spread, and what you can do about that in future so that you don't become a victim of cybercrime. Our, the national strategy is all about trying to make, this country a safe place to do business digitally, and that's our chief objective. We're not publicly disclosing things. And if there is a problem, isn't it better to know about it and then to do something about it? And that's our philosophy.
And then probably finally, as a combine a couple of the questions here is, at what stage do you normally see police being asked to get involved in an investigation? When a business is reporting it to you, and in regards to then the police's response, what is it that differs the police from, say, the NCSC support service?
Well, I mean, I work as a cyber protect officer. So we come in at all different sort of stages. Sometimes as an engagement officer, because we're supporting businesses, we might get calls from people who are saying, listen, I'm really concerned about incident response. I don't really know what we're going to do if we're going to be attacked. And they reach out to us, and we come out and offer that free service of giving advice. So we do, for where we are in the East Mids, we will do network security reviews where we talk about people's networks and their infrastructure and how secure they are as free advice. And it's great to be able to help those companies that can't necessarily afford sort of like that security expertise. But we also get called into, organizations in the middle of a problem as well. So, and as I said, sometimes a person comes in, they turn on the computer and they've been hit with ransomware. And that's when they noticed it. But like that timeline I showed you, the problem started in kind of February. Sometimes we come in the middle of that problem. We say, did you know your data's online? you know, being sold on the dark web, and sometimes we come at the end of the process. But I think no matter where you are in the incident response cycle, you know, we're there to help and support. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do if you kind of reach out to your ROCU and the cyber engagement team that are part and parcel of that.
Okay, that's great. That's fantastic. So my connection is very unstable at the moment. So if I disappear, that's why. But Dave will come in to take over. So we've gone through most of the questions. There are a couple left, but those two are going to be answered in Monday's session.
Okay.
And if I start sharing my video, hopefully I won't disappear completely.
I'll stop sharing mine.
Yeah, if you can just stop sharing yours. So to log on to the next session and get the answers to those questions, but also to look at sort of the practicalities of how you put that incident response plan into place and test it. If you log into our next session, so go onto the Eventbrite page, and in the search bar, just type in National Policing. That should bring you to a whole list of our future events with a logo eventually and hopefully. You can click onto any one of those events. Scroll down onto the National Policing Protect Network section, and that will bring you up the list of events in chronological order, so it's a lot easier to read. So you'll see that this one was today's one, and on Monday, cyber response planning to prepare. So if you go into there, this is going to be brought to you by our colleagues in the West Midlands and Welsh Police, and they'll be talking about the practicalities and how you actually put those plans into place and test them. So get registered on there for the next session. I just want to say thank you to everyone for logging in today and taking part, and thank you to Richard from the East Midlands Special Operations Unit for another great presentation. When we close this down in a moment, you will be put through to a feedback form. No one likes feedback. It's only a few questions. Please let us know what went well, what we can improve on in the future, so that we can make the remaining ones of this series as good as possible. But from obviously Richard and Dave and myself, thank you very much for logging in, and we hope to see you on Monday at the next one. Goodbye.